everybody, and welcome to another Table 13. I'm your host, A Wooden Leg, and over there we got Shady. Below me we got Mr. E, and over there we have a special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself, Dev, and tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am. Yeah, it's a hot start. Hot start now.
Right? Yeah.
We got
So
audio. I
yeah.
was gonna say
Yeah.
we're going great, but my bad.
So I am Rev. I am the host and GM of the Critshow, which is an actual play podcast where we play Monster of the Week and other powered by the Apocalypse games, all within the same dimension hopping narrative. And then our production company, Critshow Studios, also makes Let's Plays for smaller publishers that are either just launching their games or putting out their games on Kickstarter.
That is really cool what you do for a living. Let me tell you, the three of us definitely are working our way to get to do that full time, for sure. So yeah, one day. And in addition to doing the Critshow, you also host a PBS show about Indiana. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah. So I co-host a show called Journey Indiana, where we just kind of go around and interview artists and musicians. We show you different kind of natural wonders around Indiana, places you could go, just kind of like all the little hidden gems.
That's yeah. I actually caught a few of those episodes, and while I'm not planning on visiting Indiana anytime soon, it definitely reminded me a lot of my home state of Iowa. So,
Yeah,
the
it's
Midwest.
crazy the things that I learn on that show.
I bet.
Like Indiana has the longest natural underground river in North America, and then today I learned that back in the I'm gonna remember the year, but we had a very renowned female serial killer who had killed like 12 people that they could prove, 40 people that they think, and then it was like in the 40s they moved out to California and killed a whole bunch of other people that they just can't prove because in the 40s records of
Right.
people were kind of hard to come by. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Underground River thing was a little bit better than the murder thing.
On that one.
It was a
Yeah,
hard.
kind of
I
fact
took a
that was
hard left turn there. Yeah.
hard left turn. But
Solid.
that's
That's what we want here.
yeah. Oh man, yeah. We want people to like look up and be like, oh, did he just say murder? Yeah. But anyway, so yeah, you also have a master's degree from the University of Georgia in acting. You also run the director of art at a small theater in Indiana as well. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Well, I was. It's been
Oh, right.
It's been shut down because of COVID.
Right.
It still will be active, but yeah, I'm the associate artistic director at Crossroads Repertory Theater.
That's also really cool. So yeah, with all those things going on, how do you possibly have time to run the Critshow? I mean, we can barely make it with just one podcast.
I don't sleep. That is one of the things that my father passed on to me. Like I think starting at like 19 years old, I generally sleep 3 to 4 hours a night, and I have every night since then.
Wow.
It is. I'm very fortunate that I still function correctly on that little sleep, but
Yeah, I would be basically half drunk all the time if I could finally sleep 4 hours a night. I need a solid 8 hours, or I'm a very, very grumpy person. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about the Critshow. I have not caught any episodes myself, but our good man Shady over here has definitely become something of a fan through like learning about the Critshow and doing the research for this interview. So yeah, what are your highlights? What are your favorite parts? What are some things that like doing the Critshow has taught you that you haven't gotten through other aspects of your life?
mhm. So the Critshow, like I said, it's an actual play podcast. We start out in Monster of the Week, and kind of the key difference with our show, whenever people talk to me about like, oh yeah, we're doing an actual play podcast, it's like, okay, what's your hook? What's your thing? Like, what's the thing that you can point out that makes your show unique? What's different about it? Because, oh, we're all friends, or oh, we're all looking to have a good time, or we do comedy and then it gets serious. I think that's all actual play podcasts. So like,
Right.
what's your thing that you can hang up? And ours is that the players actually play as themselves. And so the story is called The Other Side of the Coin. And it is just the simple idea of if one little thing was different in their life and they became this monster hunter, how would they deal with the reality of that? And so when you first start listening to our show, you get to know the players and you get to know the characters at the same speed. Instead of getting to know the players and getting to know the characters, um, I've discovered that it seems to help people connect to the show faster than they might expect because you are getting to know the characters and the players at the same time. Um, in the sense of I have learned through this, I spent a lot of time before we started doing research on, particularly on editing and getting good audio quality. That was really important to me because my college roommate is still a sound designer. He teaches sound design, and he would have just beat my ass if I had bad audio quality on my show. And so I spent a lot of time with him learning how to compensate for the room that we were in, the equipment that we had, and he really leaned into, when it comes to recording, you can really go one of two ways. You either go equipment over processing or processing over equipment. He goes, what we're going to start with is you're going to go processing over equipment. And so, for those of you who have heard the Crit Show, for the first, I don't know, 30 episodes, we're each recording on a $7 microphone. And that was because he taught me how to balance it for the room, and how to kind of bump it up afterwards. And so having nicer equipment now is a luxury, but knowing that you can kill the echo, sitting at your dining room table with the right microphone and the correct settings was something I had no idea how sound worked. It was really fascinating to spend that time with him.
That's a
I do have to say, I came into this and I'm on like Halloween 2018
Yeah,
in your podcast right now, and and heard your voice, and I'm like, well, that's a lot higher audio quality than what I'm used to, and I think there's a lot of just obviously your equipment has improved since then.
yeah, yeah.
I think that's part of the process.
Oh yeah,
For
absolutely.
everybody doing this. But I think it's interesting though. To me, what perked up my ears or whatever about this, obviously the stuff you do being similar, is that you came into this, I assume, after having a history in TV, or at least that you're also in TV while involved in this, like I am, which is interesting to me. That I find it's a similarity anyway. Was TV like a thing you were trying to do for a while? Did it have anything to do with your decision to get into this kind of stuff, or was it just a way to do something vaguely related to other interests?
Yeah, so the bulk of my work since even before I went to grad school was almost entirely stage related. I did do a decent amount of voiceover when I was in Cincinnati before and after I went to grad school. Um, but TV wasn't something that was ever really in the realm because of where I lived. Voiceover I could do, but what I really loved was stage because I loved the audience interaction.
Mhm.
There's a big difference between an actor and an entertainer. And I kind of ride that line in the middle somewhere, that there's part of me that's always aware of the audience, which for an actor, especially if you're really emotionally invested, is not a great quality for an actor. You want them to be focused on the other person, the scene. If they have that awareness of the audience, they're not totally in it.
Mhm.
But now if you're playing a comedy, that's great to have, because then you have an actor who isn't stepping on laugh lines. You have a person who's listening to the laugh, finding the crest of it and hitting the next joke so that you raise it up instead of, and because the timing can kill the next joke or can kill the laughter. And so that's kind of always been the thing that I've enjoyed, is finding the humor in the show and hitting the audience in a way that it builds the laugh that you don't want to, anytime that you throw a joke out and it undercuts the previous joke and kills it, I always feel like I have done an injustice. Um, so I got more into voiceover when I was living in Texas, just because there wasn't a whole lot of theater there to do. There were a couple places in Austin that you could do work, but most of them were spending the bulk of their money fighting over spaces because there were so few places to do shows that they were paying out the ears to get those spots. One of the shows I did was on the roof of an Aldi's.
Oh,
If that
man.
gives you kind of any sense of the spaces they
Yeah.
were trying to fight for.
Wow.
That's a
So
great space, though.
yeah.
Honestly, like if you think there's probably power outlets everywhere and stuff too. Oh my goodness. Anyway,
So
sorry.
no. So when I was in Terre Haute in Indiana, I can't remember how I got this job, but I did a documentary for PBS called Concours d'Elegance, and it was about this car show that happens once a year, and it happens in different places. And they were having it this year in French Lick at the West Baden Springs, which is this super old, very expensive hotel that had a ton of money poured into it. And so cars were literally flown here from all over the world.
Wow.
And I rode in cars. I did interviews with people. It was just like an hour and a half special about all the things you can see there. And it must have been 6, 7 years later that PBS, that same channel, put out a call that they were looking for co-hosts for a kind of a travel show. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I would like to do that. And so I submitted my stuff and they asked me to come in. And I can't remember what it was, but something came up where I wasn't going to be able to make the audition. And so I emailed them. I said, "Hey, I'm sorry I won't be able to make it. You can give my slot to someone else, et cetera, et cetera." And like 3 minutes later, my phone rang and it was the person I had just emailed. And she was like, "Hey, if you can't make it to the audition, could you come to the callback? We're doing it next Tuesday. Are you free then?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, absolutely. That'd be great." And so I go in and I step into the room for the callback. And the person producing this show is the same person who produced the car show. And the
Pretty
who ended
small
up
world.
yeah, the person who ended up becoming the producer for that show was the cameraman on that same show. And so it just kind of fell into my lap, and they were doing when we auditioned for the show, it's a lot of banter between two people, and then you toss it to a piece, and then you come back and you talk a little bit about what you saw, and you toss to the next piece. But it's a lot of us talking to one another, but also making sure that the audience feels included.
Right.
And the first person I got to read with was actually someone that I went to undergrad with. And
Wow.
so right off the bat, we had this huge advantage because we actually knew each other. And that's actually it was the two of us who ended up getting cast as the co-host. So um, TV was and now is because I've actually stopped doing theater because I do Journey Indiana. We record every other week, but I've just put so much of my time into the podcast and the production company that I'm right about now at the 2 year mark from having been on stage.
Oh wow.
So I guess all of that then, from your TV experience and your past stage experience, how do you bring that into DMing for Critical Role? Like what have you
Critical.
heard? Sorry,
Crit
yeah,
show.
the Crit Show, yeah.
I wish.
Yeah, right, yeah. But yeah, what do you take and put into your production of the role playing?
So when I was in grad school and a little bit before that, I did a lot of radio plays.
Mhm.
And so I bring a lot of that into it, particularly the way that I edit the show. I have I don't know what they call them at conventions. It's a seminar or a presentation that I do um, about what you should cut and what you should keep in your actual play podcast, depending on what it is you're trying to get. And for us, we want something that feels much more like a radio play. And so it's called heart, horror, or humor. Those are the three things that I keep. Anything else, if it's us having to look up rules, if it's us disagreeing on something, even if it's hey, I think this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do dot 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 dot. No, no, no. What if we do this instead? If we go down a 5 minute path that never comes to fruition, I might cut that too, because for a listener, you can go down that track and then something distracts you and you come back to it, and that's not what's happening.
Mhm.
It can be discombobulating.
Right.
And so really the way that I edit it, I think is the big thing that I bring from my radio play experience. Um, and then a lot of it is just the acting element of it.
Right.
Trying to find every bad guy, every good guy, what are the good things about them, what are the bad things about them, so that when the characters talk to them, having those scenes, we're sitting across the table from one another. And there are episodes where I've had to go back and edit because these are my friends. I've known them for a long time, and at the point where this starts to happen, I know the characters that they're playing really well, like what they've been through, the hardships that they have now faced, and I know the NPCs that I'm playing, and I know what they want, what their ulterior motives are, or what their true motives are. And there are scenes that I know, like, this is going to be a very tense scene. We're going to have this conversation and it's not going to go well, but this is what this character would want to talk about. And I remember very distinctly an episode somewhere around like 50, I think, that I had to go back and record some lines because you could hear my heartbeat in my throat.
Oh my
Like when
goodness.
I would talk, you could hear it in the
Uh-huh.
microphone. And it's because I was just that's where I was emotionally. Like this person was upset and it was about, having it out with this other person across the table. And um, we actually just had some people talking about that scene today in our Discord.
So, as the dungeon master, or is it in
Game
Monster of the
Master,
Week, Game
Monster.
Master is what
It's
is
the keeper.
the
Oh, is
keeper?
it
Yeah.
keeper?
Okay.
hmm
Well,
Ooh.
regardless, as the person running the game, do you see yourself more as a director or an actor inside the game itself? Like when you're in the chair running the game, like how do you picture that position in terms of the acting experience?
So with Powered by the Apocalypse games, it is all about the prep that you don't do.
Mm-hmm.
That is a big part of how Powered by the Apocalypse games work. Is that I have a couple ideas. I've got the sketch, but I can't make anything too specific because it's going to start to seem disingenuous because their roles even there's no check like, oh, there's a number you're rolling against, you don't know what it is, so if I need this thing to happen, it doesn't matter what you roll, I can make it happen.
Right.
No, it doesn't work that way with these games because a 10 and over is a complete success, they get what they want. A 7 to 9 is a mixed success, they get what they want, but there's a cost, and a 6 and under is a fail, things go to hell, which is my favorite line in an RPG instruction manual ever. Um, and so if they get a 6, but I want them to succeed, I can't give them that thing now, at
Right.
least not without a very severe cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not directing it in a way that I might direct, say that we're playing a Pathfinder game. Kind of before we started this, we were playing through Giant Slayer, and that was much more of a directing experience because here are the guidelines for this story. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
city. Here are the people who are here. Here's what they're going to do. Here are the events that happen in this order. This is much more Powered by the Apocalypse games in video game terms is much more of a sandbox. You kind of have the loose idea. And for me, I always have clocks going so that I know where key NPCs are, what they're doing. So as time passes, they things happen that are just outside of the player's control. Um, and so for me, it is much more of of an acting position, but really it's almost much more like a stage manager because I'm kind of
Right.
sitting back and I'm watching, I'm seeing the decisions that are being made, and then I'm reacting off of that and making little tweaks to the world and the timeline to flow in with the roles that they've gotten.
We
It
do
takes
talk
a
about that a
much
lot.
yeah, it takes a much softer, a much gentler hand
Mm-hmm.
um, to run Powered by the Apocalypse games, and it's a difficult transition when you first start because you want to make people roll for everything. You want the things that you want to happen,
Right.
and we had that same issue coming from Pathfinder, and it becomes disingenuous to the just disingenuine to the story. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There's like
I-
that. Go on, Brent. Sorry.
you do mention that a lot in the podcast where it's you talk about I had my idea of where this might go,
yeah,
but then the choices you guys have made and how you have rolled for those choices has drastically pulled the story away from it, which I think is really neat because I mean I think it speaks to a good keeper, dungeon master, whatever, to be able to take those punches and roll with it and still create something that's narratively pleasing.
well, and one of my favorite things is pretty early on, but there is a NPC that is the villain. They are the villain. In the little bit of the story I have written out, they are the one who is running the thing that is happening. But the players start to interact with this character and the way that they treat him. I realize it's starting to change his personality.
I've seen that happen.
And then I was like, oh, okay, no, this guy. And so I'm doing rewrites in my head because I'm like, this guy isn't in charge. He's kind of stuck here. He's being forced to do this. And so then I start, kind of branching out and making other connections. And that was a moment where someone that in my head was clearly the villain, as the story progressed, actually became an ally to the players.
That's very interesting. That kind of speaks, I guess, to the difference between like writing a play and running a role playing game, or writing some kind of script and running a role playing game,
Yeah.
because you can but like I come from a creative writing background, and so when you like sit down to write a novel, you can't really, you write an outline, but sometimes characters do things in the novel that you don't expect as the author. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
why, in this situation this character would now react this way, even though I thought like 2 scenes ago that this scene was going to play out this way. But in role playing, it's so much more active and so much more alive. That is going to happen. That's not like a, oh my, I've cracked this character's code, I now,
Yeah.
they're a real person on the page. No, that person is a real person already. Like, they already are a real person, and so their reactions and motivations are going to be much more complicated than a static character that you're writing on the page. It's like you write a character for a playwright, and then it's up to the actor to bring that idea across. And we got into this conversation a little bit before we started recording. But yeah, to me, there is a fundamental difference between writing a play, or even acting in a play, and being in a role playing game. And especially in a role playing game that's not being produced to a wider audience. The role players are audience members and actors at the same time. They're in the game, and the more they pretend to be someone they're not, or the more, I mean, in terms of the Critshow, it's a little different because of the fact that your role players are their characters. But in the games that I run, there's a separation between those two things. So it's just an interesting take that the DM is like a stage manager. I really like that, because that's not a part the playwriting sphere that because I always saw the dichotomy between DM, role player, director, actor. But that's a cool segue there. So yeah, I suppose to round this long rambling tangent into a question.
Yeah.
What do you think about the difference between writing a play or being an actor, and running a game and being a character in a role playing game, whether it's in a basement or being produced for a wider audience?
Yeah, I mean, in the comparison to directing, it's almost more like doing a Canavacchio from Commedia dell'arte, when you run a role playing game, because Canavacchio's had, okay, so here are the characters involved, here's the inciting moment, and here's how we think it ends, and here's some beats that might happen in the middle. But once we hit this beat, if the audience doesn't respond or the characters don't respond, we know that next one's not going to work. So let's skip over that and we'll go to this one. And so everything that in between, how you get to those, is different every time you do it. And the things that are the same are the inciting moment and the end, because that lets the next person know, to come in. And so, in the sense of, it versus a play, it's really much more like a Canavacchio, because you don't know how you're going to get there. And the thing that I have discovered, you asked earlier, what have I learned
Mm-hmm.
running this? The thing that I've learned really, really deeply is that it doesn't matter what I have written, what ideas I have, what connections I have made. Your players, if they're invested, are going to make a story 10 times more interesting than you can do on your own. And so this style of game, these Powered by the Apocalypse games, these Fate Core games, any of these that are, we say narrative driven. Theoretically, all games are narrative driven,
Right.
but these are specifically narrative driven because it's how you describe what you're doing that dictates what you roll. You're never going to necessarily roll the same stat if you're doing the same thing. And so what I've discovered is that when you let go of those reins and you acknowledge that the players are going to have a much more interesting story, and you start to adapt, and in a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse game books, it talks about, yeah, success means not necessarily that they get what they want, but they get what they have earned.
Right.
And sometimes those are very different things. And so sometimes when they think that they have won something over, they absolutely have, but it has come with a cost that they didn't perceive. It's not, a punishment but it is just a ramification that maybe they didn't think about in the moment. This has turned into a rambling answer that has
Oh,
driven
no, no,
away from
no.
your initial question.
This is what we want here. This is our thing.
It's
But
a ramble.
yeah,
Yeah.
but it is about, knowing your character well enough to know how they would react in the moment. So like I said before, we're kind of cheating because the
Mhm.
characters start out playing the characters are themselves. And the benefit of that is that they know themselves really well. And it's hard for them to lie to themselves about, like, well, no, this is how I would react.
Right.
Is it? No, it's not. I would react this other way. Okay. Obviously, again, that changes as the story goes on because their characters start to have experiences that they as players have never had. So killing this monster that they didn't want to kill, or finding out that after the fact this person they didn't get there in time to save them, all starts to affect them.
Yeah.
And that's where, for me, the story really shines, is giving the players those moments of, oh my gosh, this decision that I made has affected the rest of the world.
Mhm.
Because here's the thing, Powered by the Apocalypse games, especially Monster of the Week, if you're a DM that your joy is killing your players, super easy in this game. They've got 7 hit
Okay.
points.
Yep.
Like,
Gonna
realized
write that down.
running it.
yeah, like if that's what you want to do, if you just want to kill players, it's super easy. You'll be done in 15 minutes. But the thing here we're doing together, and it talks about this in the beginning, really, of all Powered by the Apocalypse games, is that we're working together to create a narrative. And so there's going to be moments that you hate, there's going to be moments that you love, but they're all going to be justified by the story. And it's not, I grew up in that, and it's kind of a frame of mind that's not quite as ingrained in role playing as it used to be, but it really used to be me versus you if you're my
Right.
players.
Yeah.
Can I kill you? Can you defeat my creatures? These games can't work that way. They just
Right.
simply don't, because we're sitting around a table and we're telling the story, and it just so happens that the dice every now and then are deciding some of the elements
Right.
of that story.
Well, and Monster of the Week is certainly not set up in a way. D&D has challenge ratings. There's like almost like a competitive branch of D&D
Mhm.
where you sort of can set that sort of adventure up. With Monster of the Week, it's all I can make a creature that does 10 harm every time it hits.
Yeah.
You can make a creature that does 1 harm. There's really the only thing that's tying, how bad a creature is how bad it should be according to the story.
Hmm.
Right.
And I'd seen you earlier notice or mention about your players and sort of how they adapt and change the world, or how they change themselves. Um, and I was thinking back to what you were saying about your players and getting to learn about the players as characters at the same time. What have you seen, if through the Critshow podcast, that, because obviously your players aren't fighting monsters for day jobs, right? Um, that has changed, sort of, it has created a branch away from the players to what the characters have become due to everything they've dealt with and they've been through.
Um, so I think, without giving, I don't want to give away too much of a spoiler in
Right.
case anyone decides to listen, but one of our uh, Jake on the show, he's a beefy dude. He is trained in multiple forms of martial arts. He's a martial arts instructor. He has been in another college. He just got a new job where he's teaching martial arts. He could destroy you if he wanted to, but he has the gentlest heart. He does not want to have to hurt anybody. And so him having to kill monsters is really hard, because if there's some piece of humanity within inside that creature, he wants to find it. He wants to save them. Um, and then seeing some of those times where they've saved the creature and the creature had gotten them to save them as a ploy so that they could get even closer and do something even worse, and seeing, that has changed Jake's character away from Jake. That now he's got this mentality of, oh, if it's involved with this faction, it dies. The end.
Interesting.
And that's not something you would ever see in the beginning of the story.
Right. That's really neat though, because then you start off introducing the audience to the players, um, and then you sort of introduce them to their characters
Yeah.
as they progress through the story. it's just a really cool, I don't know of any, I don't run any game like, think when we were younger, I think we ran a game or two where we were playing ourselves, or whatever. But it's really cool to see that done and done so well and professionally, as sort of like the mainstay in the game itself. And I'm happy to hear it's still running with the same characters. I looking at Monster of the Week and how quickly you level up in it, I'm thinking, God, there's 2 years. What are they? They're going to be gods.
Yeah.
There's no way Monster of the Week can handle all the leveling up that they would
Yeah.
do in 2 years,
It's,
especially how they roll.
I imagine
Yeah.
it's the same way the TV shows that it's meant to
Right, yeah.
handle
It's supernatural.
similar anyway.
Yeah,
You just
right.
kind of keep stepping up
Mhm.
tension.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
transitions happen, and yeah, and for Tass, one of the other players, it's what fascinates me the most is that he starts off as the so in just in case anybody listening doesn't know, Monster of the Week, Powered by the Apocalypse games in general deal with tropes. They deal with tropes that you're used to. So Monster of the Week, you play with a playbook. To play a Powered by the Apocalypse game, again, I'm going to keep going to Monster of the Week. You as the player need, I believe, 4 sheets of paper. That's all you need. 2 of them are your character sheet. 2 of them are your list of moves. On your character sheet, you've got some moves that are special to you. On the moves sheet, you've got moves that anyone in the world can do, or any hunter in the world can do. And so Tass was playing as the professional, who is the equivalent of like the MIB. It is a group of, it is an organization of people who deal with the paranormal, the supernatural. And he started off very confident in what he was doing. Hey, Harvey, how's it going? He started off very confident in what he was doing. And as things start to progress, Harvey, hey, I know that Tass is your favorite character. You don't have to tell us that. Hey, thank you. Um, he's so chatty. That he actually starts to transition the other way, that he becomes less sure about decisions as, a decision that he makes negatively impacts an NPC or negatively impacts one of the other players, that you see him actually start to become more cautious as a character instead of more daring, which is a nice transition for him.
That's really interesting. I have actually found in my experience with new role players in terms of either Dungeons and Dragons or Hero System, they naturally will end up doing kind of what you have artificially done in terms of they'll build a character, but it'll be their themselves. They will basically like put themselves into an elf's shoes and be like, oh, I am Chiron, but I'm Chiron the elf. And then they go through the world that I've created and act like themselves as they would, but if they had like pointy ears and a great bow slung over their
Yeah.
shoulder. And it's only when you get people that have like role played for years and years and years that you really get the people who are like, oh, I'm, a really nice guy, but I'm going to play this person that will, it's actually kind of usually the opposite, like I'm kind of gruff, but
Yeah.
I'm going to play like a really nice, cleric or something like that. I tend to see people go from, killing hobos to more nuanced characters they want to play. But it's interesting that you've seen that happen in a professional sphere, and you've also kind of directed it a little bit in terms of like, hey, I want you to stay in character. I want your character to like really feel this. And I really like the perspective that you bring to the DMing as a whole. How much dungeon mastering in terms of any system did you do before you started producing real plays?
So I had mostly only played. I started role playing when I was 16, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before, but my experience is different from a lot of people, but actually sounds like it's similar to yours.
Yeah.
That D&D was not the game that I played. I've been playing role playing games for 25 years now, and I just played D&D for the first time like 5 years ago, and I've played it
Mhm.
maybe 7 times since, and 3 of those have been for a guest spot on another podcast.
Interesting.
And so it is not. I grew up playing Earth Dawn, and so that was what informed me, and my game master, had so much influence on me as a storyteller. Um, so the game mastering that I started to do was when I got into college. I had some friends who wanted to play. I tried it then, but we kind of dropped out of it for a long time. And I was living in Texas at the time, and I was driving for work. I was going back and forth to Cincinnati, and it's like a 30-hour drive.
Mhm.
And music is not a big part of my life, and I've always listened to audiobooks. But at the time, I would just ask people, I was like, "Hey, what do you listen to on long drives?" And someone was like, "Oh, podcasts." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, what are some ones that people would suggest?" And someone suggested to me the Glass Cannon podcast,
Okay.
and I started listening to that and fell in love with it. And it had been years since I had done any role playing. When I went to grad school, I hadn't played in probably 4 or 5 years. But listening to that got me reinterested in wanting to do it again. And so I kind of put out a call on Facebook, like, "Hey, I want to run a game system. Is there anybody who'd be interested in playing?" And so the most experience that I had was from that point on.
Mhm.
We played Earth Dawn for a while, and then like I said, we played Pathfinder. And then once I decided I wanted to do the show, if you want to get too much into the psychology of theater and why we
Oh,
do it,
yes.
for me, I do theater to help people forget their problems for a half hour. I'm a big fan of what I always refer to as gateway theater, like the stuff that anybody will enjoy. It's the stuff that I always use my brother-in-law as an example. He was someone who had never seen any theater until he married into my family, and he would come and see the comedies, and he would really enjoy them, and he would be surprised that he enjoyed them. And then like 10, 15 years later, we had done this production of Frankenstein that is from the point of view of Victor, and it's much more like the book. It is his fevered dream. So you start off, he is on the ship, he is sick, and the play ends with his confrontation with the monster on the iceberg. And everything in between is just his fevered nightmare, remembering what he did to get to this point.
Mhm.
And after that, I remember him telling me like, "Oh yeah, that's my favorite play I've ever seen." And that's not a transition I would have ever expected from him, and he would not have ever seen that show or liked that show if he hadn't had that experience with those other shows first. So for me, so much of doing theater is, "Hey, did you have a shitty day? Come here and sit down for an hour, and I'm gonna do my damnedest to get you to laugh, to get you to forget about your problems for a little bit, or maybe to see them in a different light than what you're used to." And that's the part of me that I say that there's a difference between an actor and an entertainer. I lean entertainer because so much of my drive is related to the audience. That was the same reason that I wanted to make this podcast, because listening to this other one, I had enjoyed the story so much, and it had gotten me through just some difficult times, and it had gotten me through all of this travel and just that feeling of loneliness when you're on the road, especially days and days at a time. And the thought of being able to kind of combine the two things that I loved at the time, role playing games and theater, and to make something that my hope was someone's going to listen to this, and it's going to distract them for a while, and they're going to have a good time. And so that's why when we first started, I had really kind of hard rules at the beginning about no no inside jokes. No joke can come up unless it has been created within the show, because I want the person who's listening to feel like they are the fifth seat at the table. And so it was really important to me that everything that was referenced, everything that was talked about, was only stuff that had grown through the show, so that you didn't feel like you were outside of the experience.
Mhm.
You feel like you know us, you know the story, and you're getting all of the jokes that are being made. And so yeah, that was a big part of kind of the why, was just that desire to create entertainment that might mean something to someone, and to someone else might just be the distraction that they need to get through that day.
I think that's, yeah, that's very close to me and a lot of other, I think, creatives in terms of like the motivations we that drive us to produce this kind of art. And so I like uh kind of following along the same track of in terms of like creative and creating the or producing the art in itself. Um uh in when you ran the Earth Dawn system and the Shadowrun system, Did you do any world building within the systems, or did you follow the um, the pre-constructed modules and some of the stories that had already been laid out, and then only needed a group to run through?
So for Earth Dawn, I used the world that they provide
Hmm.
because it's just it's such a fascinating world and the god system that they have. But the stories that I told, I made up within that world.
Okay.
They've got some great, it's comparable to any other long running game system. They've got monster manuals and in Earth Dawn they're called the horrors. It's this astral fissure has opened and these things have come through and they have tainted the magic and so it's dangerous to use magic
Yeah.
and everyone went into hiding for like 1,000 years and then these creatures went away and everybody came back out but these creatures, some of the more powerful ones, are still lingering and they're evil, they're devious, they are monsters in the true sense that some of them will feed off of your pain far faster than they would ever feed off of like your flesh or your blood. And so there was just such a rich kind of pantheon of monsters to pick from that I used those, but the way that I included them in the story were all things that I had written.
That's interesting. Because I do see, because we've had quite a few people, quite a few dungeon masters on this show, and I see people basically arriving at this show from a very wide array of paths,
Mm,
because some people, myself included, got into D&D because of the world building aspect, or not D&D, but role playing because of the world building aspect. Like the system itself, to me, has always been like vestigial next to the world that I want to explore. And then even the story itself in the role playing system is not the greatest focus that I have, but it seems like you focus much more on like the stories that can be told and like the structure of the And we are back from break, everybody. Here with Rev from the Crit Show.
You even said the
Got
right
it.
name.
I did.
Look
I
at that.
did.
Both of them were right.
Yeah.
We spent the entire break just going over it, repeating it to each other.
You know,
That's
that's you make that joke, but I literally have to do that sometimes with people that I know in real life. I think one of them is listening, but yes, Rachel, every time I call you Hannah, I don't do it on purpose. It's on accident. But yeah, so we've been talking with Rev here about a whole bunch of stuff, the art of DMing in general, the difference between the artistic styling of, you know, a play versus a produced podcast or a real play podcast, and as well as you know, a whole myriad of other things kind of squishing. PBS came up once or twice. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So there is a
We
few
talked about
things.
serial killers for a second.
Yeah,
We
there's
did for a brief moment.
In Indiana.
Indiana's top serial killer.
We're not. No, we don't want anyone to try to match that or beat that record.
Yeah.
Please, anyone
Yeah.
listening, it's not. Yep. But yeah, so there is some things that we haven't talked about that I wanted to talk to you about. So you talk in one of the interviews you did about a like rituals that you've created with people that you've never met, like your listening body. Um, and one of them was a man from Canada wrote you because he had a night shift, and he would ask you like, do you have the game on? And then you would tell him yeah, and it'd go back and forth. And I just like, do you have any more of those? Because they're so charming. I love those because that's like a real connection with with audience members, that you know that you're doing good. You know that you're achieving that thing that you've set out to do as an
Yeah.
artist. And so yeah, do you have any more anecdotes like that about people that you've met?
Yeah, so the story that you told about the guy who works night shift in Canada, he is still always the first person, as
that's
far as I
awesome.
know, that listens to every episode because he's waiting for it to download when it hits midnight. Um, you know, I told that story about like, oh yeah, I was kind of in a rough place, and listening to this podcast helped me get through it, and I hoped to accomplish something like that. Saying that out loud on, I think it was, I can't remember what interview it was, but that certainly caused a couple emails to come in from people saying, hey, mission accomplished. I was going through this thing. Um, I had someone who talked to me that they always listened to the show when they were going through their chemotherapy. They would save the episode and it would help the hour pass. I had someone that I talked to in Croatia. I went to Croatia a couple of years ago. I was playing Cyrano de Bergerac and found out that he saw the production of Cyrano de Bergerac that I was in, because he had just messaged to say like, hey, at one point we put out a call. We're like, hey, whatever country you're in, let us know because we want to know where all people are listening. And he messaged me one day, said, oh, I'm in Croatia. I was like, oh, that's crazy. I was there 4 years ago. And he was like, oh, why? And I told him, he goes, at this theater? I said, yeah. He goes, I saw that performance.
Oh man.
And the thing that I love the most about what we have going on is, on our Patreon, our dollar tier gets you into our Discord, and the Discord doesn't need us anymore. Like, we are irrelevant. They have got their own stuff that they do. They have been described amongst themselves as, how did they say it? Aggressively welcoming, because it's like the beginning of any fast zombie movie. When someone new joins our Patreon, people swarm in to greet you and show you around. But I mean, they've got their own things that they do. We've got all these channels where people share recipes. They did a Christmas gift exchange. They do happy hour every Friday night where they get into a voice channel and they'll drink and talk and play games together. We've got documents up where people can add each other on Xbox or PlayStation. And so these listeners have started to become friends with one another and then visit each other, unrelated to us anymore. This is now a community that is totally in their hands. We planted the seeds for it, but it doesn't need us anymore. And so that's one of my favorite things is, there's a place there where people can talk about their problems. There's a place there where people can talk about their victories. and to go in every day and see all of those channels lit up, and knowing that, like, oh, if I don't go in and check this, someone else is there.
Mm-hmm.
One of, a couple hundred people are there talking this person through a problem, or cheering them on as they get this victory, or whatever. So that is kind of cheating the answer that you asked, but
Nah,
it kind of shows up every day in that Discord, which is at the end of the day, when this is over, when I and this thing are all dust, it will have meant something to some people, which really
yeah.
matters.
That's the philosophy of art, I mean, like
Yeah.
the statue, the Ozymandias poem, the statue's like marker still is there. Like, everything around is dust, nothing else remains, but the plaque is still there. So maybe in like 2 billion years, the Critshow logo will be unearthed somewhere, and someone will be like, "What?"
What is
And
this?
yeah, so it still echoes throughout history whenever you make art. It's the thing that lasts beyond anything else.
Yeah. And you had asked earlier, TV and film is not something I ever got a whole lot into, but I love watching movies much more than I like going to plays, but I like doing plays more than I like making movies.
Oh,
And the
interesting.
thing that I love about movies is the thing I love about the podcast, is that when I listen to it right now, it will be just as good when I listen to it in 10 years. That performance doesn't change.
Hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
with a live show, every night you come, the audience is different, the performance is different. I'm taking the best of that episode, cutting out the things that need to be cut out, maybe even doing some retakes on lines of things that weren't clear or intentions that weren't clear, and that performance will always be there.
Hmm.
And I love that.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I've talked to playwrights or directors who, that's why they prefer playwriting, is because the
Mm,
performance is always different. In a movie
yeah.
it's static, it'll never change, and so people, it's interesting how you know you get like that idea of like an artist, but the breed, it has such a wide variety in terms
Hmm.
of like how we approach meaning in art, because and there's some people, there's some artists among us, they're just out to make the next Harry Potter so they can make $1 billion and retire off of it,
Right.
and there's the other breed that's just like, I can't stop making this, like I can't stop like writing this world down or
My
these
brain
characters
will
down.
explode.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there are the ones who are just like, I don't really care what I'm producing as long as it's bringing joy to people, as long as it's
Mm,
helping someone get through a hard time. And I think that that's, something really special about role playing, in that you have a way for people of all types and all backgrounds to come together and make art in a communal sphere, a communal setting, that isn't really possible in like other mediums of storytelling. You can't get five of your friends together and write a novel. That just doesn't happen.
yeah.
And it's the same way with like, like writing a play, or that kind of thing. It's just a really intimate way of telling a story, um, that is, is really fun to explore. There's no question there. It's just observation and rambling. So we're just gonna leave that hanging.
Good statement. Kind
Yes, thank
Nailed
you.
of.
I got it in one.
Yeah.
I
It's a
think
wrap.
that's it. So as far as like, I guess you're talking about your production side of things, and that you've got the ability to redo lines and do things along of that nature. I guess I almost said along those lines. That wouldn't be great phrasing, but um, but like, so I guess I kind of ask most people who produce any sort of product like this a question along these lines. If you feel comfortable
Yeah.
answering, how much like predetermination happens? Is it sort of along the lines of your kind of Kia, if I'm saying that right? I don't remember exactly what it was. It's not familiar with the term. Do you establish like beats, and then sort of play by
Yeah.
ear? Is it totally up in the air?
Yeah.
Do you
So
set it pretty
it
close?
is totally improvised. Even in my editing, even in retaking of lines, I'm not changing the structure of what happened in the moment. It might be that two people talked over each other. It might be that you said the wrong word in this sentence. And so now
Right.
the information you're giving is like, oh, we have to grab the blue key and get out of here. When what you meant to say was, we have to grab the blue rose and get out of here. Whatever, something
Right.
that makes it confusing for the audience. We are heavily edited in the sense that I am producing it, like I said, like a radio play. I'm cutting out dead air. I'm cutting out pausing to look up rules, and sometimes I'm cutting out jokes that might kill the momentum of the scene. But I'm never changing anything in the structure of the story. I'm not going back and being like, I wish this had happened instead. Let's do this instead. Or, you know what, there needs to be this additional this additional damage taken here so that you're like more wounded, because I don't think you're wounded enough at the end of this or whatever. We're not changing anything like that. I want to keep the story that was told whole.
Okay. I was just curious, mostly as that's pretty similar to what we end up doing. We've had once or well, maybe just the once. We've had like audio issues where we had to
Yeah.
record an episode once.
Higher
Yeah.
episode.
And it was, just there wasn't any other way to get around it. Basically, all the audio was not salvageable, and so like there we were. But I mean, but generally speaking, yeah, I remove dead air, and I'll maybe sort of smooth out some jokes that come up in the middle of like narrative momentum or dramatic tension building or whatever, and whatever. But yeah, usually I tend to try and keep it as close to the original organic thing as well. It's just I'm always curious how much of a production, especially as someone else. My mom brought me up listening to old like radio dramas, and so as somebody else who connects it to something like that, I was curious, how far down that track do you go? But it's interesting that you can get there without going all the way to scripting lines and stuff. It's fun to get close.
Yeah. Well, and I'll even throw out too that we have had, I think, in the course of the time we've been doing this show, I think 2 times, maybe 3, we've had to re-record episodes. And when we have had to do that, I have entirely changed the story. So when they walk in the door, say that the cliffhanger in the last episode was they walk in a door and they see this big creature standing there. And then the beginning of the next episode starts with the creature charging at them and doing this and that. I hit them right off the bat with it. It looks at them, it yells, it bursts out fire, and it leaps to the ceiling into the sky. And so now there's no choice but for it to be different. I don't want them to try to recreate what we did before, no matter how much we may have liked it, because you just can't. And so I changed the story so that they're playing through a new experience if we have to re-record an episode.
Not to drag this kicking and screaming back into philosophy, but why is that important to you? Why is it important to keep the story undirected, or I suppose like natural, I suppose, but that doesn't really feel like the right word. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you doing what you're doing there. Yeah, because when we re-recorded, I kept the things the same, and so we did kind of try to kind of recreate
here and there that shifted around, but
Right.
it was definitely the same beats. Things traveled along differently, but we also did like a Groundhog Day spoof thing.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, they all woke up after having lived the day the first time.
Oh,
Sort of like, wait, what kind of deal?
I'm getting deja vu. Everyone's getting deja vu today. But yeah, so why do you take that stance philosophically?
I mean, this is going to be my simple answer. There's a longer answer, but you can't stand in the same river twice.
Yeah.
No matter how much I want to recreate that moment, because it's not scripted, because I'm not directing it, I can't get that same response out of them. When this reveal happens, they're not going to have that same gasp. They're not going to have that same frustration. And at least for me, when I'm editing, if you're faking it, I can hear it.
Yep.
Because I'm an acting teacher on some level. And so if you're lying to me, I know it. That's not real laughter. That's not real fear. That's not an honest response to this person. And so I avoid them having to try to recreate something, because that also puts additional stress on them. Oh, I got to get back to that place where I was emotionally. And I got to try to remember what it was I said too. What did I say? How did I say it? Because it transitioned into this person talking now. So what was it I said that made them say this? Man, that's too much to think about. And
As a
so
player, I
I'm gonna start the
appreciate
story
that.
over. Yeah.
It is. It's. That is. So I suppose what's the longer
The longer answer is just kind of the one I rambled off, that I don't I don't expect them to have taken such detailed notes that they could know, oh yeah, I said this stuff in this part, and that triggered you to say this, and then the monster came in and did this thing, and then we rolled dice, and those die results were a 7, then a 9,
Right.
then a 2. Like, that's just
Right.
all impossible to track, especially in Powered by the Apocalypse games, where those die rolls have such a huge effect. You know, there isn't
Right.
that
Right.
game master screen of, oh, you rolled a 10. Well, that's okay, because all you needed was a 10.
Yeah.
When in
Right.
fact the paper says you needed a 17. I don't have that freedom, and the audience hears those results, so the audience knows the
Yeah.
results that they should be getting. Um, so it just would be such a production. It would take 10 times longer probably to recreate the episode than for me to write new stuff for a new episode.
And it still wouldn't be as genuine.
Yeah.
Is
Coming
that
from somebody who stood in the same river twice,
try?
it was very,
Well,
you know,
we
it
had
was
to do a gimmick to write it in, and that was, I
Yeah.
think, the sacrifice we made, because we felt that was the easiest way to handle it. But it is
Yeah.
definitely
That's a
an
good way to
interesting
solve it too.
prospect. Yeah, is write it into the lore somehow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
But,
that's why we did. Yeah, there's
yeah.
some fucking cleric came up and asked, like, told them, hey, this day is feeling weird because we've all
Yeah.
lived this day once
Peter
before.
the-
You know, yeah, Peter the agricultist.
There are
Peter of
never
the
mistakes, only
Agricult.
undiscovered lore.
Yeah,
Right.
that's how I view
Like
things.
Not
I
a
am
bug, it's a feature.
I
Yeah.
am dyslexic. It's something I've
Me
struggled with my
too.
whole life. And there's this part where they encounter an NPC whose name breaks down. It's like, oh, it makes this other word. And so this is what it stands for. And so I laid it out, and it's like, oh, this is what it stands for. And I was so proud of it. And then I said it out loud, and it made it into the episode. And I realized I had spelled the word incorrectly.
Mhm.
And so at one point they brought that up, and the NPC was like, oh, the NPC who created, so this person had created this other NPC. So 2 NPCs, one had named the other one had this acronym name. And the first NPC went, oh, I'm dyslexic. And the NPC was named, like, yes, I knew that, and I did not want to upset him. And so just now this character is dyslexic
And
because
the other one's like polite enough to not
Yeah.
say anything about
Yeah.
your name being
there is no,
misspelled.
it's just undiscovered lore. You didn't know that this scientist was dyslexic.
And I really do think, like, those kinds of parts are the reason why producing role-playing things, like, whether, you know, like either podcast or even live stream or that kind of thing, really I'm attracted to more than sitting down and writing a traditional novel, or more than sitting down and writing a play. It's because, you know, like, as I wrote a novella that was, you know, almost 200 pages, and yeah, sure, characters surprised me while I was writing the novel, but I had a good idea of where I wanted things to go. But in role playing, I feel like I'm just on the tracks, like running along next to these characters that are just as much people as me, and just watching them make these decisions. And because I'm also fallible, you know, I end up making mistakes or doing things that make it into the story itself that wouldn't, because an editor would be like, oh, you know, you spelled this name wrong. Here, I fixed it for you. And you're like, oh, yeah. So your mistake, it just gets scrubbed out. Whereas in this kind of medium, you know, those mistakes can turn out to be the best parts of the story, or the best part of the episode. Is that, oh yeah, I mean, you know, Kyron messed up a name, and so we all spent the whole time pretending the character was this character instead of the other character. And it's just like, I really like those organic pieces.
What's that video game where you push the junk around and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger?
Yeah.
That's game mastering.
Yep.
There's no mistakes. Just pile it up into the ball, and we'll find a way to use it.
Just gotta fit
Secret
it in there
connection.
somewhere.
Keep rolling. Yep.
Find a way. Stick it in next to the dresser and the lamp.
Yeah, just that weird.
I think
poster.
my favorite gift that I've seen of what it's like to game master, especially a Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's is it Tom that's the cat in Tom and Jerry?
That's my
And he's riding on the front of a toy train, and he's got a handful of track, and
Oh.
he's laying it down one piece at a time.
Yeah.
Gromit one. That's the
Oh,
same
yes,
deal.
yeah.
It's Gromit sitting on the
Yeah.
claymation dog or whatever,
Yep.
sitting on a
Yeah.
train, and he's chung, chung, chung,
That's
chung,
like
chung.
that's what it's like
Yeah.
to run a Powered by the
Absolutely.
Apocalypse game.
that's how I feel like
That's
I've
DMing
always DM'd. Yeah.
in general for me.
Yeah.
I feel like it's basically just okay. Let me build a bunch of shit, and then let's see how you guys kick over my sandcastle.
Exactly. Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is what bits you're gonna set on fire, and then I'll try and follow up with reasonable, and then chaos ensues in the game. And I think
Exactly.
that's the fun. Yeah, is that sort of it's that improv element that's sort of at the core. I think that makes role playing, at least in my opinion, different significantly from these other bits, and that is like really entertaining and whatnot, I guess. Desirable.
Well, it is almost midnight,
Oh, man,
and
look at you.
at midnight I turn into a pumpkin. So we have to finish up
really
the interview before.
horrible.
It's terrible,
Again,
actually.
yeah,
The
no one
transformation.
No one
is-
wants to see it.
No, it's
my
not
God.
clean. There's a lot of screaming and gourd related gore.
Kyron, you're wasting valuable time.
No, God, the transformation is
Related
only 3
gore.
minutes away. But yes, so thank you, Rev,
Seems already
for
been born.
coming on Table 13 and chatting with us, telling a few jokes, reflecting upon the life of the DM and the relationships that we make through doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. It was a lot of fun. So if you got to go ahead. This is we got this time to
Plug more things.
plug more things.
Yeah, like I said before, anything that I do for the most part that matters, you can find at the critshowpodcast.com. We are a Monster of the Week actual play podcast, technically a Powered by the Apocalypse podcast. And one of the things I didn't talk about, one of our big tenets of the show, and this is for our Let's Play and for our main story, is that if you listen to the first story arc, you'll walk away knowing how to play the game, and you won't feel like we taught you the game because we're not breaking in to talk about mechanics. You're learning it with the players, and so that's why I think a lot of our people have enjoyed our Let's Plays, because you just bought Fate of Cthulhu, you just bought Demigods, whatever. Listen to these 3-4 episodes, and you'll walk away know how to playing.
That's really neat. Yeah, that's another one of your things the Crit Show does too. We talked about your players being players and then they grow, but you also do systems that are connected in a universe.
Mhm.
Then there's no other podcast that I've seen that does that kind of thing either. So it's really cool.
It's it is kind of originally we were like, oh yeah, this show is kind of like it's kind of like Buffy or Ash versus the Evil Dead or whatever, but now there's an element of it's like it's kind of also like Quantum Leap or
Nice.
Twin Peaks.
That's awesome. So yeah, check out the Crit Show. Thank you, Dev, and we have been Irrational Radio.
Rev.
No, I said Rev.
You
Rev?
said Dev.
Dev. Oh no. No.
Yeah, this
Oh.
happens. This is
Yep.
anyway.
This is our thing. Is just making fools of ourselves. So, well, thank you again, and everyone who's watching. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been an Irrational Radio Table 13 production.